Until then, let us read from another section of Roar the Ganges. We're very close to finishing this. Here we are learning what it's like to be a Swami now, to be a Hindu monk who has renounced the world and has completely dedicated themselves to spiritual awakening. I listened carefully as Swami Dayananda delivered his clear and powerful teachings about Ishvara in response to Richard's questions. This is the kind of teaching that first attracted me to Vedanta in general, and to my guru, Swami Dayananda, in particular. I discovered then, for the first time, the tremendous difference between a teacher and a preacher. I had listened to many lectures by prominent religious and spiritual figures who passionately exhorted us to accept a particular doctrine or point of view. They were preachers, determined to persuade us to believe what they believed. But a teacher, on the other hand, has no such agenda. Teachers of mathematics or history do not want to inculcate in their students particular beliefs about algebra or World War II. A teacher's role is to make a student understand. A teacher imparts knowledge, not beliefs. And that is the role of a spiritual teacher as well. After all, the word guru means teacher, not preacher. Access to an authentic guru was crucial for my spiritual growth. As a teenager, I completely rejected my childhood religious beliefs. I developed an allergy, so to speak, to religion and to preaching. Later in college, I was trained to think logically and scientifically. I was taught that truth should be based only on scientific observations. What could not be observed was relegated to the domain of theory or fantasy. Theory, if it seemed plausible; fantasy, if it did not. Science and logic became my only authorities. I dismissed anything falling outside the umbrella of science, and logic as irrational and false. With this background, it is hardly surprising that I began my spiritual quest without belief in God. I prided myself in being an agnostic. I had concluded, quite logically I thought, that God was unknowable. I also felt that prayer and devotion were pointless. According to my reasoning, how can you pray to an unknown God? I was fond of a joke about an eccentric church that rejected conventional beliefs about God and whose members purportedly started their prayers with, "To whom it may concern." My child agnosticism stood in stark contrast to my devout beliefs as a child when I attended Mass in a cavernous Catholic church adjacent to the I have never seen this word, parochial grade school I attended from first grade onwards. Kneeling in a pew at that tender age, my chin did not even reach to the top of the pew in front of me. The nuns who taught our daily religion class said that our church was the house of God. I felt duly awed each time I entered. Its wooden beams soared high into the air, framing tall stained glass windows through which the morning light filtered. Behind the altar was a massive crucifix with a larger-than-life wooden figure of Jesus pinned to its cross pieces, gazing down upon us with sorrowful eyes. The High Mass in those days, before the reformations of the Second Ecumenical Council, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right either, in the 1960s, was celebrated as it had been for the past 1,000 years. It was a dramatic display of ritual pageantry and mysterious observances. The Mass opened with a professional hymn thundered from a colossal organ, with a processional hymn thundered from a... I just read that twice. Really screwing up reading today, aren't I? Notes rained from its hundreds of pipes. The lowest pitches shook the floor and made my stomach queasy. The priest entered from the back of the church, adorned in richly embroidered silk vestments. He walked down the central aisle in solemn procession, accompanied by an assisting priest carrying a crucifix and 4 altar boys carrying candles. How I envied those altar boys, but I was too young then to assume that holy responsibility. The Mass itself was a feast for the senses. Rows of tall candles on golden stands, fragrant incense, ringing bells, and the choir's harmonious chanting of the Latin liturgy. The congregation of hundreds sang hymns, sometimes joyous, but more often poignant and melancholy. All of this had a profound effect on my impressionable mind. The Mass's grandeur and worship of God was exhilarating and intoxicating to me. Sometimes I was moved to tears. Many times I felt God's inexplicable presence, the greatness, His goodness, as though I had been touched by the finger of God. As I grew older, my feelings of awe and wonder faded, along with my childish image of God as an old man with a white beard and flowing robes, sitting on a golden throne amidst the clouds in heaven, surrounded by leagues of saints and angels. My juvenile beliefs disappeared along with other childhood fantasies like beliefs in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. But as these beliefs faded, no new beliefs or image of God arose to fill that gap. By the time I was a young adult, I had become skeptical of anything that could not be directly experienced or scientifically proved. I dismissed religion as a naive delusion for people who needed a belief to cling to for security. Karl Marx's opiate of the masses. I considered myself fortunate to be free of such beliefs. I lived in a godless, mechanical world governed impersonally by the laws of physics. For me, life had no meaning. Nothing transcended the mundane reality and futility of lives inevitably ending in suffering and death. I lived in that cold, godless world for 20 years, until Vedantic teachings led me to discover a new vision of God, of Ishvara, a vision to replace my childhood notions. This new vision was founded not on belief, but on understanding. In retrospect, I see how my prior worldview had grown so narrow that I could not see beyond my own limited concepts. It was as though I was standing before an exquisite painting with my nose almost touching the canvas, so that all I could see were blobs of color and tiny cracks on the dried paint. From that perspective, I could never appreciate the beauty of what was before me. I had to step back and see the whole picture. I had to recognize that logic and science were not the sole authorities for what is real. The scope of their validity extends only to worldly matters. The existence of Ishvara lies beyond their reach. I never returned to my childhood belief in God as a master overseer who controls the universe from his heavenly abode like a supreme puppet master. Instead, through the teachings of the Vedic rishis, I gained a sense of Ishvara's immediate presence in the world and in my life. I came to recognize Ishvara as the intelligence pervading the universe, the natural order governing all, and I recognized Ishvara as the underlying reality or fabric upon which the world has been woven. Initially, these were just concepts to me, abstractions that I grasped intellectually like any other idea. But over a period of time, my understanding grew in ways I never expected. Many people sense Ishvara's presence when inspired by great beauty, a flowery alpine meadow surrounded by snow-capped peaks, inspired, soul-stirring music, the majestic architecture of magnificent cathedrals and temples. In India, I was overwhelmed again and again by this sense of Ishvara's presence when visiting ancient temples. But it was not their towering spires or ornate sculptures that invoked this feeling. Rather, I felt deeply moved when standing in the presence of what I perceived as profoundly sacred. The innermost chamber of every Hindu temple encloses a sacred form known as a Murti, an icon or a deity that represents Ishvara in a particular manner. Some temples enshrine Lord Shiva in the form of Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, engaged in the dance of creation and destruction. In other temples, Lord Vishnu is represented reclining on a bed at the bottom of the ocean, effortlessly sustaining the entire universe. In still other temples, Goddess Lakshmi's outstretched hands bestow blessings for prosperity and happiness. These and other temples are the devotional focal point for many of India's 700 million Hindus. Devoted worshippers can sense Ishvara's sacred presence in each of the deities enshrined in the temples. The sanctity of each deity is not created by the artisan who sculpted the stone form or cast the metal figure. Such artisans create only beauty, not holiness. But the deities are not simply works of art. They are consecrated forms in which Ishvara's presence has been specially evoked. After a temple's construction is complete, an elaborate multi-day ceremony is performed in which the temple structure and the deity within are purified and dedicated for worship. Special mantras are recited to symbolically invest the deity with Ishvara's living presence. Unique rituals are performed in which life is breathed into the deity and its eyes are opened. The rites of consecration culminate with a priest climbing to the very top of the temple to pour sanctified water on the spire rising over the sacred chamber below. Perhaps worshippers themselves also have the power to specially invoke Ishvara's presence in a particular place or form. wherever worship has been conducted for centuries, be it an old church, temple, mosque, or synagogue, many people can feel a divine presence there. Perhaps the fervent prayers of generations of worshippers have helped sanctify these places, saturating them with holiness. When I entered temples where daily worship had continued for over 1,000 years, I felt Ishvara's sacred presence intensely, almost palpably. My experience in such temples was radically different from visiting beautiful monuments in India, like the Taj Mahal. In spite of the Taj's architectural perfection and aesthetic, its splendor did not inspire me as ancient temples did. The Taj Mahal is, after all, a mausoleum, an unbelievably extravagant burial crypt built by the Mughal ruler Shah Jahan for his wife Mumtaz. The Taj Mahal is a monument expressing a man's love for his wife. To visit the Taj Mahal just once was enough for me, but I have returned to many temples again and again for Ishvara's Darshan, to see and be in the presence of Ishvara. And with that, we'll pause our reading there for now, as we conclude this chapter. Next time we will apparently be discussing the worship of the formless, that which is beyond all the forms, the Murtis. So I thank you all for listening.